The One Piece card game has seen a dramatic increase in power creep throughout its 9 sets, 2 mini sets, and 20 starter decks. We've seen the game shift through several metas and styles of gameplay. In Set 1, the meta was very simple and very straightforward. You'd build a board and set up for a limited number of plays. Leader skills mattered, but more so as finishers and slight augments to your game plan. In fact, Eustace Captain Kidd was the best leader because his skill was a built-in win condition. Much more importantly was the key game pieces you built into your deck. A one-set game meant limited top-end options, limited good mid-game options, and very little consistency options. It was a fun, but ultimately a caveman-like demo of what was to come. Then with the release of Set 2, the game moves on to the era of red having the best options, be it rush, consistent value from searchers, or having good guard options. More importantly, we'd start to see leaders really start to drive decks instead of just being modifiers. Whitebeard was a force that warped the game around him, while Zoro and Trafalgar Law finally got enough cards to truly build around and show off their unique leader skills. Set 3 saw a further refinement of these strategies. It left the game in a very unbalanced place, because Set 2 and 3 saw the release of the colors black and yellow respectively. Black and yellow were left in the game in about the same power level as Set 1 was, kind of like a Set 1.5, meaning it was on the colors green, blue, and purple to do something. But with less slots in general and weaker gimmicks, it was over for a diverse metagame. Luckily for One Piece, people found the red mirror matches entertaining, and they had just enough variety to keep the game strong and what would normally be a death sentence for other new games. I'm sure the insane prize pool and scalping helped as well, ensuring product would sell out even at questionable times. OP4 is really a catch-up set for the other colors in the game. The top decks didn't change, but the power gap between red and the other colors was closing. Yellow got more absurd trigger units and another top end, purple got supercharged with the 3 captain starter deck, black and yellow also managed to speedrun their Set 2 janky gimmicks with 2 bad starter decks, ST8 and ST9. So, of course, when a ban list came for red, we'd see a very diverse format. Yellow obviously dominated, as it tends to do in a best deck vacuum, but we'd also see decks like green-purple Doflamingo, red-purple Luffy, Eustace Captain Kidd again, and even red-purple Trafalgar Law before it was cool. I'd describe sets 1 through 4 as an establishing period of the game's colors and themes. Mechanics are released and then refined. The color pie I built for my deck choice videos was mostly finished around here. Now, OP5 is different from the first 4 sets, because it's the first noticeable overwriting of the previous options. Let me clarify, this isn't like a jump from effectless cards to cards with effects. This was the jump from early strong options into new, stronger options. Black decks would see a complete rework, finally getting good graveyard recursion and cheap efficient removal options. Purple gets its first real Dawn battery in Captain Kidd, and yellow got more spam deck and even more removal. But what really makes this new meta different is the new leaders themselves. This is the point where leaders have to be the consistent driver of decks. It was introduced in OP2, and it's finally wiped out the previous meta entirely by OP5. Even when the red bans were removed, it didn't dent the Set 5 meta. The why for this is interesting. First, each one of these new meta leaders, and every good meta leader going forward, has built-in consistency. Sakazuki has a built-in draw and discard each turn, literally the best consistency in the game so far, even coming into OP9. Enel has his healing effect baked into the leader, so you can't whiff a Big Mom. Purple Luffy has an extra draw and built-in ramp, so you don't need to rely on having to see a specific ramp card in the deck like the previous Kaido. In future, we'd see Gecko Mori and Rob Lucci leaders with built-in milling, Green Uda with an extra film draw each turn, Vinsmoke Reiju with an extra draw each turn, and Green-Yellow Yamato with the entire deck practically being the leader itself. I'd go so far as to say that the only reason Trafalgar Law is the best deck comes from Bandai wanting to cover a mistake and releasing a second copy of Gordon. That plus Pudding being a second Captain Kidd blocker, and you have 8 copies of this deck's 2 most important cards. Before this, the deck really was kind of too inconsistent for competitive play otherwise. What I'm getting at is the consistency issues from Set 1 of One Piece never fully went away. Even with better ratios and more options, it's still not enough. So the best leaders having an extra layer of juice pushed this game forward dramatically. As someone who plays a ton of rogue and bad decks, consistency is almost always the difference. Kairos, Vinsmoke Reiju, and even Kinemon can easily keep up with the best decks. They just can't do it consistently. Imagine going to a tournament not only having to outplay your opponent each round, but also having to deal with just automatically losing 2 to 4 games out of 10 because your deck mathematically can't see the pieces every time. So that's reason 1, consistency. Reason 2 for OP5 being significant power creep is the massive increase in removal. Of course, the best deck Sakazuki has removal as its entire gimmick, but yellow and purple got options too. Yellow got Gadatsu, and purple finally got enough ramp to consistently use its removal options, such as Poly and 9-drop Kaido. Decks this format had to pivot to deal with their board being consistently removed. This means more units with on-play effects, and less units with when attacking or setup type effects. Let's look at the previous meta decks of Whitebeard and Trafalgar Law. Law fell off completely out of the meta because removal meant it couldn't build a board and freely accrue value like it used to. Whitebeard completely shifted away from techs like small 1-drop blockers and the big vanillas it used to run, now playing entirely around rush units that get their value immediately. These were a thing before, but now it's really the entirety of what this deck is. Every other deck in the game would slowly trend along this pattern. The third reason for the change in power creep is efficiency. How much value you get for your Dawn or your resources. Red getting more developed support first meant it was much more efficient than the other decks. Black being able to get value from Grave and remove an opponent's unit at the same time as developing a board put Black as a much more efficient color. Yellow would also be pushed from getting free stuff with triggers and life manipulation, albeit less so than Black. This efficiency creep is the hallmark of usually bad power creep, especially past a certain point. Games like Vanguard get cards that do more and more until one card needs to do 100 things. Look at the text of Draconic Overlord throughout time. There are 2 ways you can look at trying to solve efficiency creep. Either you make efforts to move out options in hard micromanaged sets like in Magic the Gathering, or you say fuck it, we ball, like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Both are valid, but each comes with their own ups and downs. Magic the Gathering had to introduce set rotation, a brutal ban list to handle their power creep, and multiple formats, and it still doesn't really always work. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, cards are not meta if they can't carry a broken combo, or just shut off an opponent's options immediately or without response. I love Yu-Gi-Oh! It's fun, but it's brutal. Really too much for most people. One Piece as a card game early on has to make key decisions on how it wants to proceed with improving efficiency. You can improve efficiency, but for every improvement, you have to introduce checks and balances. You know, to keep the game fun. Yu-Gi-Oh! Had to introduce hand traps and more powerful blowouts. Magic has had to release more manaless disruptions over the years, and has had to reevaluate how they implement removal and disruptions into their sets. Vanguard released G units, heal effect units, quick shield, new G era retrains, the new Messiah. Oh man, okay, there's so much for Vanguard. But One Piece hasn't gotten bad enough to need a counter mechanical card design yet. But maybe we'll need to get one later. Following OP5, OP6 and EBO1 would follow a similar pattern to the previous Red meta, with these sets refining the ideas and mechanics of earlier options. But unlike the previous Red meta before, players didn't like the Sakazuki, Gecko Moria, and Katakuri meta nearly as much. Plus, the removal-based meta meant that quite a few weaker decks that couldn't pivot around those strategies were practically impossible to play. Luckily, Bandai followed this up with a new ban list, one that was much better than the first. That would remove Sakazuki, nerf Black and nerf Yellow, letting OP7 usher in an amazing balanced format that was on par with the balance and diversity of Set 1 without the toxicity of OP4 post-ban list. OP7 brought with it new solid leaders for Black and Green. Green, who sorely needed it, gave us solid top-end options to Yellow and Black. Plus, with the focused legacy support of Extra Booster 1, it would allow older decks to get a foot in the door, somehow creating a healthy balanced meta, albeit with a tint towards Yellow and Black. Well, kind of. Thinking about this now, recording, and it's like, every deck in OP7 is kind of equally toxic, and it works out. Rob Lucci is an aggro removal based deck, Trafalgar Law is an aggro removal based deck. They both just eat your board away. Bonnie is a stun rest turbo deck. Black Yellow Luffy just kind of wombo combos and kills you if you let them set up for it. And Enel is like the stall, obnoxious late game turbo deck. And really, every type of player has something very strong that they kind of like. Why is it fun? I don't get this. Because it really is. If we go a bit into the future and look at the Japanese meta of OP8, the push towards Yellow and Black reaches ahead. And even more dramatically is Bandai's fumbles around the leader Trafalgar Law, creating what's effectively a 2-deck format around Law and Lucci, with sprinkles of rogue options here and there. The efficiency creep that I mentioned before really hit these decks hard. Efficient removal and efficient to play units. These two decks will likely be hit on a future ban list, or maybe the ban list is already out by the time you're watching this video. And that's the current summary of the One Piece card game's meta and power creep. I think it's been handled well. Not every format has been fun, but Bandai is consistently trying to make it better, and does try to improve slightly along the way. And I really think they have. It can be a difficult claim to believe when I say that One Piece has handled power creep well, but there are a few factors below the surface that I believe will make this point quite a bit clearer. For a first analysis, if we look at what cards are actually used in each deck, there's a shocking amount of cards that are still used from the earliest sets in the game. Let's take a look at this current build of Rob Lucci. While Lucci is a leader from the newest set, he uses an almost even split of cards from different sets. Breaking it down, the deck gets most of its support from OP3, and only a bit more than 50% of this deck's cards were released in the previous year. Now, this build I'm analyzing is a bit teched out, but the other builds show a similar pattern, using different old cards like Kaku, and different new cards like Secret Rare Sabo. It's interesting, because these aren't just old staples being dragged along, it's unique game pieces and options being made and kept relevant by new support. Kaku, who's a dead card on release, is now meta more than a year later. It's really cool. The best example of this I can throw on my side is Jewel Ribani, who makes use of the Supernova engine from Set 1 and Structure Deck 2, the Don Quixote engine from Set 4 and 5, and lastly, the top-end options in OP6. It only took 3 new Supernova cards and a new leader to bring back support from old sets. Enel is another deck, literally using a yellow boss monster from every set Yellow was in that had a generic boss monster. Like actually crazy. Of course, not every deck is like this, but it's a healthy sign of cards being relatively balanced. This goes even further with how old leaders are held relevant. While the meta right now is still held between a few decks, Bandai has gone above and beyond with releasing support for older decks and leaders. Extra Booster 1 is a set entirely dedicated to legacy support, and we're getting a new series of starter decks also entirely dedicated to releasing legacy support by specifically boosting popular old leaders and themes. But even beyond stuff designed specifically to be legacy support, Bandai has been designing generic support cards for all decks in a color. Time and time again, we've seen the release of cards that lift every deck up. Kid and Killer boosted every aggressive red deck, Rebecca solved every black deck, and most recently, Black Maria turbocharged a ton of janky purple decks. In particular, Black Maria enables Structure Deck 4 Kaido to hit relevance again. Probably not meta, but certainly a valid rogue deck. It's genuinely amazing to see old decks constantly thought about and getting buffed. You can't really get that from every card game. Now, it's not to say it's perfect. This design philosophy has led to some of the most egregious examples of power creep in the game. Gecko Moria, oh man. Gecko Moria is a great generic tool. It just so happens to carry the entire black color on his back, being a potential 17 Dawn in value for 8 Dawn. While Black Maria buffs every purple deck, the most meta purple deck, Trafalgar Law, gets by far the most value from it. It makes their Dawn management practically free. What I want to say is that generically designed cards tend to lift up all decks equally. So bad decks become playable decks become good, and good decks become broken. So nothing really changes, except the game gets faster. Most leaders are not unique enough to benefit more from staples than the best decks, so Bandai's attempts to buff colors is a lot less effective than it should be. That being said, Bandai's generic support strategy allows every player to feel like their deck is getting support and is constantly getting better, which is true. It might not actually be getting better meta-wise, but it really does feel like it, and it gives players more room to mess with stuff. Games like Vanguard and Yu-Gi-Oh! Make the choice to mostly release archetypal locked cards, leaving power creep to feel astronomically higher than it already is. Let me explain what I mean with this example. In the V Premium era of Vanguard, only certain clans or themes would be in each set. It would be like if blue wasn't in a set for Magic and they rotated the colors. Let's say if each set pushed forward by the fictional unit of 1 power creep, it could be a whole 2 to 3 power creeps before it came back to your deck. This would be really miserable for a large portion of players who only played 1 or 2 themes. The Bermuda Triangle theme only got yearly support. It would show up, power creep the entire game, slowly fade to irrelevance, and then do it again next year. This philosophy is one of the major reasons why Vanguard's overdressed reboot was so exciting, since they mostly fixed this problem. One Piece, by contrast, chooses to lift all ships at the same time, and does a very good job all things considered. Very few leaders have missed getting later support. In fact, due to the limited nature of the One Piece show and universe, it's likely inevitable that they can't miss old decks. With the release of OP10, Bandai has announced the intention to go back to the previous themes of Dressrosa and Land of Wano. This is because after OP9, we've covered the entirety of the One Piece manga so far. If we pull up the One Piece art graphic, we can tie every arc to a set. OP9 catches us up fully to the current manga, with the theming of the 4 new emperors after Wano arc. Everything has a card now. For new content, we're limited at this point to small side characters, things the anime and manga haven't gotten to yet, and niche spin-offs. In fact, there's so little left to add to the card game, they're adding in a large new archetype based around the Odyssey video game. But side note, I'm excited for this archetype, even if it's clearly garbage. The video game screenshots remind me of the greatest card game ever made, Dot Hack Enemy, which used cropped PS2 renders for its card art. Unironically, the best card game. The looping back on previously established themes and being forced to develop them over and over again is crazy. Other card games like Digimon and Fire Emblem Cypher found themselves resorting to creating original card game only characters to avoid this issue. One Piece, however, could only really do so much to skirt this problem, really due to its nature as a singular story. It really is uncharted territory, since most anime tie-in card games don't make it for near that long. Most similar anime series don't even go beyond 2 to 5 sets, and even still, they have to resort to peak like Inuyasha wearing a hat. Aesthetic Warrior aside, what really makes that interesting is the impact it's going to have on gameplay and power creep. We would have to rotate through a limited number of themes and boost them forward again and again. Just new cards is only going to do so much. They have to market sets. Will there be new introductions of mechanics to sell sets? Multicolored cards, new card types, new keywords? Will they all in on more effects per card? Will they do set rotation? Will they do more non-canon cards? It's hard to tell. I would issue a few predictions though. First, I don't think there's going to be set rotation. No point. It achieves nothing and would just hurt the game. And while it's not in question, I'd say that there's not going to be a reboot anytime soon. The game is successful. It's not Battle Spirits or Dragon Ball. I think One Piece will add in new mechanics. If I had to guess, we'll get new keywords sometime around set 12-ish. They've been really hesitant so far to increase the complexity of their game, so I think they'll delay it as much as possible. After that, it's hard to imagine them stopping. A new card type is inevitable for card games. It's coming as soon as sales start to meaningfully dip, or the design gets stale. But I really can't predict when that will be. I could predict some mechanics though. Maybe it could be something like equipment. It's just the easiest to imagine, and would work very well with the game's mechanics. A Planeswalker or mini leader type card, these get thrown around a lot in games. They do sell very well, but most often have mixed results for gameplay. The most unique option to add would be alternative Dawn types. It could be very fun to add an additional layer to the deck building. Maybe it would be useful for buffing old leaders, but that also dramatically adds to the game's complexity, so I really don't know. At the end of the day, I can't really predict what Bandai's cooking. They've handled things very well so far, but they're in uncharted territory now. I'm excited for the future of this card game, and even if they do fumble it here, they've still done massively good things for the TCG community. From proving cards can be accessible and still profitable, to listening, albeit slowly, to the community, and bringing together a really good card game community. I don't know how to end this video, so please subscribe, really would help. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.